What if I told you that one of the richest and most famous writers in the world once sat alone in a cold apartment with no money, no job, and no clear future? What if success didn't begin with confidence, but with fear, rejection, and tears? Before Harry Potter changed millions of lives, J.K. Rowling was a single mother living on welfare, struggling to survive one day at a time. She felt invisible. She felt like a failure, and many nights she wondered if her dream was already dead. But hidden inside her darkest moments was a quiet story, one that refused to disappear. In today's video, you will not just learn about J.K. Rowling's life, you will feel it. And while listening, you'll naturally improve your English through a real, emotional story. Welcome to English SpeakCast and our series, Learn English Through Story. This is not a story about magic. This is a story about hope. Long before the world knew the name J.K. Rowling, before book covers and movie posters, there was a quiet little girl sitting alone with her thoughts. Her full name was Joanne Rowling, and she was born in a small town in England. She wasn't loud. She wasn't the center of attention. She was the kind of child who watched the world carefully, noticing small details that others often missed. While other children ran outside to play, Joanne loved to sit with a notebook and a pencil, creating worlds that existed only in her imagination. From a very young age, she fell in love with stories. She didn't just read books, she lived inside them. When she opened a book, time disappeared. The noise of the world faded away. In her mind, stories were not just words on paper, they were safe places, secret doors, and quiet friends. Writing felt natural to her, like breathing. By the age of 6, Joanne was already writing short stories. One of her earliest tales was about a rabbit, written just for fun. She proudly shared it with her family, not knowing that this simple act, putting imagination into words, would one day change her life. Her parents listened, smiled, and encouraged her. That small encouragement meant more than they realized. At school, Joanne was known as a good student, but not a perfect one. Teachers noticed her talent for language and storytelling, yet she remained shy and reserved. She didn't dream of fame or wealth. Her dreams were simple and quiet. She wanted to be a writer. That was all. While other children talked about becoming doctors, athletes, or movie stars, Joanne imagined herself sitting at a desk, writing stories that made people feel something. She believed, deeply and honestly, that stories had power, the power to comfort, to escape, and to heal. Her childhood was not perfect, but it was filled with imagination. Books became her companions. Writing became her voice. In a world that often felt confusing, stories made sense. But innocence doesn't last forever. As she grew older, life slowly began to change. Responsibilities increased, expectations grew heavier. The safe world of childhood imagination started to feel far away. Still, deep inside her heart, that small dream remained, quiet, fragile, but alive. She didn't know it yet, but the storm was coming. And it would test everything she believed about herself, her dreams, and her future. As Joanne Rowling grew older, the soft protection of childhood slowly disappeared. Life became louder, faster, and more demanding. Dreams were no longer enough. The world began asking difficult questions. What will you do with your life? How will you survive? She went to university, hoping that education would bring clarity. She studied French and learned about literature, language, and culture. On the outside, everything seemed fine. She was intelligent, she had talent, she was doing what society expected her to do. But inside, something felt wrong. Joanne didn't feel confident about her future. While others seemed to have clear plans, she felt lost. Writing was still her passion, but it didn't feel practical. It didn't feel safe. People around her didn't talk about becoming writers. They talked about careers, salaries, and stability. After graduating, reality hit hard. She moved from one job to another, trying to find her place in the adult world. She worked as a researcher, a bilingual secretary, and in office roles that drained her energy. Every morning, she woke up feeling heavy. These jobs paid the bills, but they didn't feed her soul. She often found herself staring out of windows, her mind drifting into stories instead of spreadsheets. Her heart wanted to write, but fear held her back. Fear of failure, fear of wasting time, fear of disappointing others. At one point, she worked at Amnesty International, surrounded by serious people doing important work. Even there, she felt like an outsider. She knew she was capable, but she didn't feel fulfilled. The gap between who she was and who she wanted to be grew wider every day. Writing didn't stop, but it became something she did in secret. Late at night, after long days, she wrote small pieces, ideas, fragments. She dreamed of writing a novel, but struggled to believe it could ever become real. Then life dealt her another blow. Her mother became seriously ill. The pain of watching someone you love slowly fade is unbearable. Joanne felt helpless. The woman who had supported her love for stories was slipping away. That loss would change her forever. When her mother died, Joanne was devastated. Grief followed her everywhere. It sat with her in silence. It whispered doubts into her mind. The world felt colder, heavier, and less forgiving. Instead of success and confidence, her early adult life was filled with uncertainty, grief, and quiet disappointment. She wasn't famous. She wasn't successful. She was just another young woman trying to survive, trying to understand herself. Yet, even in confusion, something remained constant. She still believed in stories. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but somewhere deep inside, she believed that writing was not a hobby. It was her purpose. The storm hadn't fully arrived yet, but the sky was already darkening. After years of uncertainty and emotional loss, Joanne Rowling longed for a fresh start. Her life felt heavy in England, filled with memories of grief and unrealized dreams. She wanted distance from the pain, from the past, and from the feeling of being stuck. Then, love appeared. Joanne met a man who seemed different, exciting, and full of promise. He was a journalist from Portugal, passionate and ambitious. Their connection felt intense and fast, like a sudden light after a long darkness. For Joanne, this relationship offered something she deeply needed: hope. They fell in love quickly. Soon she made a bold decision that surprised many people around her. She left England and moved to Portugal. It wasn't just a change of country, it was a leap of faith. She believed this move would mark the beginning of a new life, a life filled with love, stability, and finally, happiness. Portugal felt warm and alive. The streets, the language, the culture, everything felt new. Joanne began teaching English to earn money. During the day, she worked. At night, she wrote. Writing returned to her life with renewed strength. In the quiet hours, she started developing an idea that had been living in her mind for years. A boy an ordinary boy, and a world hidden behind the ordinary. She didn't know it yet, but the early shape of Harry Potter was beginning to form. For the first time in a long while, Joanne felt hopeful. She imagined a future where she could be both a writer and a partner, where love and creativity could exist together, where pain was behind her. Marriage followed soon after. It felt like confirmation that she had made the right choice. She was building something real, something lasting. She dreamed of a family, of warmth, of belonging. She believed she was finally moving forward. But beneath the surface, small cracks began to appear. Cultural differences created tension. Financial stress added pressure. Misunderstandings grew heavier. What once felt exciting slowly started to feel unstable. The comfort she expected didn't fully arrive. Joanne tried to hold everything together. She wanted the story of her life to turn into a happy chapter. She told herself that struggles were normal, that love required patience. Then she became pregnant. This should have been a moment of pure joy, and in many ways it was, but it also made everything more fragile. Responsibility increased. Fear returned. The future suddenly felt uncertain again. The hope that had carried her across countries began to shake. She was standing at the edge of something important, but she didn't know whether it would save her or break her. The storm was no longer far away. It was about to arrive. What began with hope slowly turned into pain. Marriage did not bring the safety and peace Joanne Rowling had imagined. Instead, daily life became tense and unpredictable. Arguments replaced laughter. Silence replaced understanding. The home that was supposed to protect her began to feel like a place of fear. The relationship grew darker. Joanne felt emotionally trapped. The love that once felt exciting now felt heavy and unsafe. She was far from her family, far from home, and increasingly alone. With every passing day, she felt herself shrinking, her voice softer, her confidence fading. She tried to make it work. She told herself to be patient. She believed things would improve after the baby was born. But deep inside, she knew the truth. The marriage was breaking her. Then her daughter was born. A tiny life entered the world, fragile, innocent, and completely dependent on her. Holding her baby in her arms should have been the happiest moment of her life. But instead, Joanne felt a mix of love and fear. Love for her child, fear for their future. The emotional pressure became unbearable. The marriage collapsed. Joanne made one of the hardest decisions of her life. She left her husband and returned to the United Kingdom with her baby. She left with almost nothing, no stable income, no clear plan, and a heart full of pain. She wasn't just divorced, she felt defeated. At 25 years old, Joanne saw herself as a failure. Her marriage had failed, her career had failed, her life, as she imagined it, had fallen apart. She carried guilt, shame, and exhaustion everywhere she went. She moved to Edinburgh, Scotland, hoping to be closer to her sister. But safety did not bring comfort. She was now a single mother in a cold city struggling to survive. Nights were the hardest. Her baby cried, the walls felt thin, the silence between cries felt even louder. Joanne often sat alone, holding her child, wondering how her life had reached this point. She had never planned this story. This was not the dream she once had as a young girl writing stories in notebooks. This was not the future she imagined when she moved to Portugal with hope in her heart. The emotional collapse was quiet but deep. She felt invisible to the world. No applause, no recognition, just survival, one day at a time. Many people would have given up at this stage, but something inside Joanne refused to die. Even in exhaustion, even in fear, a small voice whispered to her. It reminded her of stories, of imagination, of words. She didn't feel strong. She didn't feel brave. She felt broken. And this brokenness marked the lowest turning point of her life. The story was far from over. But before hope could return, she would have to face the darkest chapter yet. Returning to the United Kingdom, Joanne Rowling found herself in a reality far harsher than anything she had imagined. She was a single mother with a baby to care for, no stable income, and almost no support. Each day was a struggle, an uphill battle against hunger, cold, and uncertainty. She rented a small, cold apartment in Edinburgh. The heating barely worked, and during winter, the icy drafts seemed to seep into her bones. The furniture was sparse, the walls bare, and the refrigerator often empty. There were nights when she went to bed with an empty stomach, giving the little food she had to her daughter. She knew she had to survive, not just for herself, but for the child who depended entirely on her. Welfare support helped, but it was barely enough. Joanne learned how to stretch every penny, budgeting for essentials, and often skipping things for herself. The world of paperwork, benefits, and daily survival became her life. She felt like a stranger in her own country, carrying a heavy weight that no one could see. Her days blurred together. She would wake early, take care of her baby, and try to find small jobs to earn money. There were mornings when she cried quietly in the bathroom, not wanting anyone to see her weakness. She felt trapped in a life that offered no room for dreams, only survival. The future felt uncertain. Every decision had consequences. Could she afford food today? Could she pay rent tomorrow? Could she ever write again? The dreams she held as a child seemed impossibly distant. Writing, a love she had always cherished, now felt like a luxury she could not afford. Yet, in the midst of these struggles, she carried a stubborn spark. It was a quiet, almost invisible determination. She refused to let poverty, fear, or exhaustion completely extinguish her love for stories. In her mind, she imagined a life that was different, a life where she could write, where her daughter could grow up safe and happy, where hope was not just a memory. Even small moments became sources of courage. She would watch her daughter sleep and feel a quiet strength. She would see other parents walking with their children and silently vow that her child would have a better life. And in those rare, fleeting moments of peace, she would take out scraps of paper or her small notebooks and jot down ideas that danced in her mind. It was not an easy life. The cold apartments, empty cupboards, and endless worries could have swallowed her spirit. Many would have given up. But Joanne's love for her daughter and her belief in stories kept her moving forward one day at a time. In the eyes of the world, she might have seemed powerless, but in those quiet, desperate moments, she began to discover a resilience she never knew she had, a patience that would become her secret strength, a determination that would, in time, change everything. She was at rock bottom, but even at rock bottom, the seeds of magic were quietly taking root. The hardest battles Joanne Rowling faced were not only outside her home, they were inside her mind. As the months passed, the weight of single motherhood, poverty, and isolation slowly crushed her spirit. Some days, getting out of bed felt impossible. The future looked like a long, dark tunnel with no visible light at the end. Joanne slipped into deep depression. She felt invisible, as if the world had moved on without her. Friends were building careers, families were growing, lives were moving forward, and she felt stuck, standing still while everything else rushed past. There were moments when fear wrapped around her chest so tightly she could barely breathe. Fear of failing her daughter, fear of never escaping poverty, fear that her life story was already finished. She cried often, but quietly. She didn't want attention. She didn't want pity. She would cry alone, late at night when her daughter was asleep. Tears fell without sound, soaking pillows, carrying years of disappointment and shame. Depression made her feel weak. She questioned her worth. She questioned her intelligence. She questioned whether her dream of becoming a writer had ever been realistic. The voice in her head was cruel, constantly reminding her of everything she had lost. There were days when she felt completely numb. She would walk through the city, pushing her baby's stroller, surrounded by people, yet feeling completely alone. Faces passed her by, none noticing her pain. She felt like a ghost in her own life. At her lowest point, she had frightening thoughts she never imagined having. The idea of not existing felt tempting, not because she wanted to die, but because she was so tired of hurting. But one thought stopped her every time: her daughter. That small, innocent life depended on her. Leaving was not an option. Even in her darkest moments, her child anchored her to the world. Love became her lifeline. Slowly, she began to seek help. She spoke to doctors. She admitted her pain. She accepted support, even though it was difficult. Talking about depression was not easy, especially at a time when mental health was often misunderstood. But she chose survival. The days were still dark. Fear didn't disappear overnight. Depression didn't magically fade. But something important happened during this silence and suffering. She began to understand pain. She learned what it meant to feel broken. She learned empathy, not from books, but from experience. These emotions, as painful as they were, started shaping her voice as a writer. She didn't know it yet, but these dark days were teaching her how to write characters who felt real, characters who struggled, characters who felt fear, loneliness, and hope. Her suffering was not meaningless. It was shaping her story. In the silence of depression, a quiet strength was forming, a strength that would soon find a voice, not in tears, but in words. And those words were about to change her life. Sometimes the greatest ideas are born in the quietest, darkest moments. Years earlier, long before poverty and depression entered her life, Joanne Rowling had been sitting on a delayed train traveling from Manchester to London. The journey was slow. The train stopped again and again. There was nothing to do but wait and think. And in that waiting, something magical appeared. In her mind, she saw a boy. He was thin. He wore glasses. He didn't know who he really was. This boy lived an ordinary life, but hidden inside him was something extraordinary. He didn't know it yet, but he belonged to another world, a world of magic, danger, friendship, and destiny. The idea arrived fully formed, like a gift. A magical school, moving staircases, teachers with secrets, a boy who would change everything. Joanne didn't have a pen. She didn't have paper. She couldn't write anything down. All she could do was sit there and hold the idea in her mind, afraid it might disappear. But it didn't. The idea stayed with her. Years later, in Edinburgh, during the darkest chapter of her life, that same idea returned. When everything else felt broken, this story remained untouched by pain. It felt pure, safe, alive. Harry Potter became her escape. When the world felt cold and cruel, she entered his world. When she felt powerless, she imagined magic. When her future felt empty, she filled pages with possibility. She began to write seriously, not for fame, not for money, but for survival. She wrote because it gave her purpose, because it gave her something to wake up for, because it reminded her that she was more than her circumstances. The story grew slowly. Characters appeared, friendships formed, enemies emerged. The magical world became detailed and real. Joanne poured her emotions into the pages: loss, fear, love, courage. Without realizing it, she was writing her own pain into the story. Harry was an orphan. He felt unwanted, lonely, different. In many ways, she understood him deeply. The magic in the story wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, subtle, hopeful. It whispered instead of shouting.
For Joanne, this story was not just imagination, it was a lifeline. She didn't know if anyone would ever read it. She didn't know if it would ever be published. All she knew was one thing: she had to finish it. In a world where everything felt uncertain, Harry Potter became the one thing she could control. And with every word she wrote, the darkness around her began to loosen its grip, just a little. The spark had been lit. Now she needed the courage to protect it.
Writing at home was almost impossible. The apartment was cold, the walls felt heavy, and caring for a baby left little space for concentration. But Joanne Rowling refused to let her circumstances silence her story. So she found another place to write. Every day she wrapped her daughter in warm clothes, placed her in a stroller, and walked through the streets of Edinburgh. She searched for cafes, not for coffee, but for warmth. Inside those small, crowded spaces, she could sit for hours without freezing. She ordered the cheapest drink she could afford and chose a corner table. Her daughter slept beside her, and Joanne wrote. She didn't own a laptop. She couldn't afford one. Instead, she used pen and paper, filling notebooks page by page. Her handwriting became her connection to hope. Every sentence was slow, deliberate, and carefully chosen. Around her, life continued. People laughed, cups clinked, conversations flowed. But Joanne lived in another world. She moved between reality and imagination, between a struggling single mother and a storyteller building a magical universe. She wrote whenever she could. If her daughter slept for 10 minutes, she wrote. If she slept for an hour, Joanne wrote more. If the baby woke up, she stopped, patiently, lovingly, then returned to the page again. There was no rush, no pressure, only commitment. She believed in the story, even when she didn't fully believe in herself. She didn't tell many people what she was writing. It felt too fragile, too important. She protected it quietly. Some days were harder than others. There were moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if she was wasting time, if writing would ever change anything. But then she would read what she had written, and something inside her would whisper, "This matters." Writing gave her structure. It gave her discipline. It gave her identity. She wasn't just a single mother on welfare. She was a writer, even if no one else knew it yet. In those cafes, surrounded by ordinary people, living ordinary lives, Joanne Rowling created something extraordinary. She built friendships between characters. She designed classrooms and castles. She imagined courage in the face of fear. And slowly, quietly, the story took shape. Each page brought her closer to the end. Each chapter felt like a small victory. No applause followed her work. No one noticed her struggle. But she continued anyway. Because sometimes the strongest kind of belief is silent. And in those warm cafes with nothing but a pen, paper, and determination, Joanne Rowling was changing her life, one word at a time. Finishing a book is harder than starting one. As Joanne Rowling moved closer to the final pages of her manuscript, doubt began to whisper more loudly. She had carried this story through poverty, depression, and exhaustion. Now that the end was near, fear returned with a new question. What if it's not good enough? She reread her pages again and again. Sitting at cafe tables or in her small apartment, she edited with care. Every sentence mattered. Every word felt heavy with meaning. She crossed out lines, rewrote paragraphs, and adjusted details, slowly shaping the story she believed in. There were no editors guiding her, no deadlines pushing her forward, only her own discipline. She edited by hand, pen scratching across paper, pages piling up beside her. The work was lonely and intense. Some days she felt proud of what she had written. Other days she felt embarrassed, unsure if anyone would ever take her seriously. She worried about her voice. Was it too strange? Too magical? Too childish? Who would want to read a story about a wizard boy? Yet, despite these doubts, she kept going.
because stopping would mean admitting defeat, and Joanne had already lost too much to lose this too. When she finally typed the manuscript, it felt unreal. The story that had lived in her mind for years was now complete. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone existed, not as a dream, but as a full novel. She held the pages in her hands. They felt fragile, important. This was not just a book, it was proof that she had survived. Proof that her pain had not destroyed her creativity. Proof that she could finish something meaningful. But finishing the book did not bring relief. It brought fear. Because the next step was the hardest one of all, sharing it. Sending her work into the world meant opening herself to rejection. It meant risking humiliation. It meant hearing the word no again and again. She hesitated, but she also remembered why she started. She wrote to survive. She wrote to hope. She wrote because stories saved her. Taking a deep breath, Joanne prepared to send her manuscript to publishers. She had no idea what was coming, only that the most painful chapter was still ahead.
Sending the manuscript was an act of courage. Joanne Rowling carefully printed her pages, placed them into envelopes, and sent them out to literary agents and publishers. Each envelope carried more than paper. It carried hope, fear, and years of struggle. When she dropped them into the mailbox, her heart raced. She imagined someone reading her story and understanding it, believing in it. Then she waited. Days passed. Weeks passed. Every time the mail arrived, her stomach tightened. She hoped for good news. She prepared herself for disappointment. Living in poverty had already taught her patience, but this waiting felt different. This waiting felt personal. The first response arrived. It was short, polite, cold. No, thank you. She read it once, then again. The words didn't shout. They didn't insult her, but they hurt deeply. She folded the letter and put it away, telling herself it was only one opinion, one door closed. She sent the manuscript again. Another letter came back. Another rejection. And then another. Publishers said the story was too long for children. Some said it didn't fit the market. Others didn't explain at all. Just no. With every rejection, her confidence weakened. Each letter felt like confirmation of her worst fears, that she wasn't good enough, that her dream was unrealistic, that she was wasting time she couldn't afford to waste. She was not a young writer with years to experiment. She was a single mother. Every rejection carried a silent message. Be practical. Give up. Find something safer. But she didn't. She allowed herself to feel the pain, but she refused to stop. She kept sending the manuscript out again and again, even when it felt humiliating, even when it felt pointless. 12 publishers rejected her. 12 times she faced disappointment. 12 times she questioned her worth. Some nights she lay awake replaying every rejection in her mind. She wondered if her writing was childish, if her characters were boring, if she had misunderstood her own talent. But there was one thing she couldn't ignore. The story still felt right. When she read it, it still made sense. It still had heart. It still mattered to her. And that feeling kept her going when logic told her to stop. She reminded herself that rejection did not mean failure. It meant resistance. And resistance, she believed, could be survived. She made small changes, refined her query letters, and tried again. Each rejection hurt, but it also strengthened her skin. Slowly, painfully, she learned how to endure disappointment without losing herself. The world was testing her, and she was still standing. But with every no, the weight grew heavier. She was getting closer to a breaking point. And soon she would face the question every dreamer must face at least once. Is it time to quit? After so many rejections, exhaustion took over. Joanne Rowling wasn't just tired of hearing no, she was tired of hoping, tired of believing, tired of fighting a world that seemed determined to ignore her voice. Reality pressed down on her harder than ever. Her daughter was growing, expenses were increasing, life demanded stability, not dreams. Every rejection letter felt like a warning, this is not working. There were days when she stared at the manuscript and felt nothing. No excitement, no magic, only fear. She asked herself painful questions. What if I never get published? What if I'm wasting time that should be spent finding a better job? What kind of mother chases impossible dreams while her child needs security? These questions hurt more than rejection letters. They attacked her identity not just as a writer, but as a parent. For the first time, she seriously considered quitting, putting the manuscript away, accepting a normal life, letting go of the dream she had carried since childhood. She imagined a future without writing. It felt empty, but safe, and safety was tempting. She felt ashamed for still hoping, ashamed for believing she was special. The world didn't need another writer. Publishers had made that clear, and she wasn't strong anymore. She was tired of being strong. But then, she looked at her daughter. She thought about the kind of example she wanted to set. Not a story of comfort, but a story of courage. She didn't want her child to grow up believing that dreams should be abandoned at the first sign of pain. That thought changed everything. She realized that quitting would hurt more than rejection. Failure was painful, but regret would be unbearable. So she made a quiet decision. Not a dramatic promise, not a loud declaration, just a simple choice. One more try. She didn't expect success anymore. She just refused to surrender completely. She allowed herself to continue, not because she was confident, but because she was honest. Writing was who she was, even if the world never noticed. She took the manuscript back out. She prepared it once more, and with trembling hands but a steady heart, she sent it out again. She had no idea that this small, tired decision would soon change her life. She only knew she wasn't finished yet. The reply didn't arrive with fireworks. There was no phone call, no celebration, no promise of success. Just a small letter. After years of silence and rejection, Joanne Rowling received a response from a small publishing house in London called Bloomsbury. At first, she didn't allow herself to hope. She had read too many polite rejections to feel excited. But this letter was different. They liked the story. They didn't love it loudly. They didn't promise fame. They didn't talk about millions of copies. They simply said yes. Yes, they would publish the book. Joanne read the letter again and again, afraid she might misunderstand. Her hands shook, not from excitement, but from disbelief. After everything she had been through, someone had finally seen value in her words. The offer was modest. The advance money was small, barely enough to make a difference. The first print run would be limited. No one expected big success. It was a quiet agreement, almost cautious. But to Joanne, it meant everything. This was not a financial victory. It was a personal one. For the first time, the world outside her imagination acknowledged her as a writer. The years of poverty, rejection, and doubt suddenly felt justified. She was advised to use her initials instead of her full name, J.K. Rowling, because publishers believed boys might not want to read a book written by a woman. She agreed. At this point, the dream mattered more than recognition. When the contract was signed, there were no celebrations. Joanne went home, held her daughter, and cried quietly. These were not tears of happiness alone,
but of relief. She hadn't been wrong. She hadn't wasted her life chasing stories. Someone believed. It wasn't a big yes, but it was enough. That small yes was a door opening, slowly, carefully, into a future she never imagined possible. The world had not changed overnight, but everything was different now.
Getting published did not mean Joanne Rowling's life suddenly became easy. In fact, very little changed at first. The book was printed quietly. There were no big posters, no interviews, no promises of success. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone entered the world without noise, like a whisper rather than a shout. Joanne was still a single mother. She was still careful with money. She was still unsure about the future. Even after the contract, fear didn't disappear. She wondered if anyone would actually read the book. She wondered if children would care about a boy with glasses and a magical school. She wondered if this yes was only temporary kindness. Most days, life looked the same. She woke up early. She took care of her daughter. She waited. Waiting became her new challenge. Waiting for reviews, waiting for sales, waiting for proof that the struggle had meaning. There were moments when she felt foolish for hoping again. After so many disappointments, trusting success felt dangerous. She had learned to not expect miracles. The bookshops didn't place the novel in special positions. Some copies were hidden on shelves. Some were never noticed at all. Joanne understood that publishing a book didn't guarantee readers. So she focused on patience. She reminded herself that she had already won something important, the right to be heard. Even if only a few people read her story, it existed. That alone felt powerful. She also continued writing, not because of pressure, not because of contracts, but because writing was now part of her survival, just as it had been before publication. Slowly, quietly, something began to happen. Children started reading the book. Teachers began recommending it. Parents noticed their kids staying up late, unable to put it down. The response wasn't loud, but it was sincere. Joanne heard small bits of feedback. A librarian loved it. A child asked for the next book. These tiny signals mattered more than numbers. They felt real. Still, there was no instant fame, no sudden wealth, no dramatic transformation. Just steady movement, step by step, page by page. Joanne learned an important lesson during this time. Real success often grows slowly. It doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly in the background while you continue doing the work. She trusted time. She trusted readers. And most importantly, she trusted the story. She didn't know it yet, but the world was already beginning to listen. At first, the change was almost invisible. A few more copies sold. Another school requested the book. A librarian ordered extra copies. Nothing dramatic. But then, something remarkable began to happen. Children started talking. They talked about Harry, about Hogwarts, about magic and friendship. Word spread the way real stories spread, not through advertising, but through excitement. Kids recommended the book to their friends. Teachers read it aloud in classrooms. Parents noticed how deeply their children were connected to the story. Bookstores began to notice. Sales increased slowly but consistently. The book was no longer hidden on shelves. It moved closer to the front. People started asking for it by name. Joanne watched this from a distance, almost afraid to believe it. She had spent so many years being ignored that attention felt unreal. She waited for it to disappear, but it didn't. Then came awards. Small ones at first, children's book prizes, recognition from reading groups. Each award was a quiet confirmation that the story mattered. Publishers began to ask questions. Is there a sequel? Are there more stories? Joanne smiled quietly. There were more. As the second book appeared, excitement grew stronger. The magical world expanded. Readers returned eagerly. And then something unexpected happened. International interest. Foreign publishers wanted the book. Translations began. Harry Potter crossed borders. The story that was once written in cafes to stay warm was now traveling the world. Joanne's life began to change, but slowly. She could afford better housing. She worried less about food. She felt safer. But the biggest change wasn't financial. It was emotional. She was no longer invisible. Readers wrote letters. Children thanked her for the story. Some said Harry helped them feel less alone. Others said the books made them love reading. Joanne realized something powerful. Her pain had become someone else's comfort. The struggles she once thought were meaningless had shaped a story that now belonged to millions. Fame arrived gently, then suddenly. Book sales exploded. Lines formed at bookstores. Movies were discussed. The world finally noticed. But inside, Joanne remained grounded. She remembered the cold apartments, the empty refrigerator, the rejection letters. Success didn't erase the past. It honored it. She had not been saved by magic. She had been saved by persistence. And now, the quiet girl who once wrote stories alone was being heard by the entire world. Years later, Joanne Rowling could look back and see her journey in a way that only time allows. The cold apartments, the empty refrigerator, the rejection letters, the endless nights of doubt and despair. At the time, each moment had felt unbearable. Each challenge had seemed like an impossible wall. But now she could see that the struggle had shaped her, not just as a writer, but as a person. She remembered feeling invisible, feeling powerless, feeling broken. And she realized that those feelings taught her something invaluable: empathy, understanding, patience, strength born from suffering. Without those dark days, the characters she created would never have felt real. Harry's loneliness, Hermione's determination, Ron's loyalty, they were reflections of her own experiences, filtered through imagination and hope. She understood fear because she had lived it. She understood hope because she had clung to it even when the world seemed cruel. Gratitude replaced bitterness. She had been poor, she had been rejected, she had been afraid, but she had survived. And survival had brought clarity. The life she thought was ruined had in fact prepared her for everything she had dreamed of. She also realized how fragile success can be. Fame and fortune do not erase struggle. They simply provide a new canvas on which to paint. The lessons learned in the quiet, painful moments remain forever. Joanne often spoke about this quietly in interviews, not to boast, but to inspire. She wanted people to understand that failure and pain are not signs that dreams are impossible. They are often the soil from which dreams grow. The hardships she endured made every word she wrote richer, every story more authentic, every character more alive. Her journey taught her patience. It taught her resilience. It taught her that even when life seems cruel, even when the future is uncertain, holding on to what you love, your passion, your purpose, can carry you through the darkest storms. And in that reflection, Joanne found peace. She didn't regret the pain. She didn't resent the struggle. Instead, she saw them as teachers, guides, stepping stones to something greater. Because of those hardships, she became not just a successful writer, but a storyteller who could touch hearts, inspire courage, and remind others that even in despair, hope is possible. Her life before fame was not just a story of survival, it was the foundation of her legacy. J.K. Rowling's story is not just about books or wealth. Her legacy stretches far beyond money. It is about inspiration, hope, and the quiet power of stories. Millions of readers have grown up with Harry Potter, but what they often don't see is the journey that made the magic possible. The single mother in a cold apartment. The writer rejected dozens of times. The woman who cried quietly in cafes while her baby slept. This is the true heart of the story. Her life became proof that dreams are worth holding on to, no matter how impossible they seem. That failure, struggle, and loneliness do not define a person, they refine them. Beyond entertaining children, her work encouraged millions to read, imagine, and believe in themselves. For some, Harry Potter was more than a story. It was a lifeline. A child struggling with confidence could see courage in Harry. A lonely reader could find friendship in Hermione and Ron. Joanne had turned her own pain into hope for others. She also used her success to help people in need. Philanthropy became part of her story. Joanne supported charities for children, education, and those struggling with poverty. She understood firsthand what it meant to feel powerless, and she wanted to make a difference. Her life teaches a powerful lesson. Struggle is not wasted. The obstacles she faced shaped not only her books, but the impact she would have on the world. Money and fame were secondary. Her true gift was her ability to inspire and connect with people through storytelling. For listeners like you, her journey is a reminder. Your current struggles are not the end of your story. They may be shaping your future strength, creativity, and wisdom. Pain can become purpose. Loneliness can become imagination. Failure can become resilience. Every setback Joanne endured became a building block for her legacy. Each no she received, each dark night she survived, each day she spent writing in a cold cafe was a step toward a life that would inspire millions. And that is the magic that goes beyond money or fame. The magic of turning hardship into hope, despair into creativity, and silence into a story that changes lives. Her legacy is alive in every reader who dares to dream, in every writer who continues despite rejection, in every person who believes that their story matters. It is a legacy that proves one thing clearly. The greatest magic is not in wands or spells. It is in courage, persistence, and hope. And so, the story of J.K. Rowling reminds us that dreams often grow in silence. From a quiet little girl writing stories in notebooks, to a single mother struggling in cold apartments, to a woman holding a small yes from a publisher, her journey was never easy. Every tear, every rejection, every lonely night mattered. Every small effort built the foundation for the extraordinary life she leads today. Success didn't happen overnight. Fame didn't appear like magic. It was patience, persistence, and belief in the unseen that carried her forward. She trusted the story inside her, even when the world said no. For anyone listening today, remember this: your struggles, your fears, and even your darkest days can be shaping your story. Dreams are rarely loud at first. They whisper. They grow quietly, like seeds in the soil, waiting for the right moment to bloom. So if you are chasing something important, keep going. Write your story. Speak your truth. Believe in the small steps, the daily efforts, the quiet resilience. One day, the world will notice, not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you refuse to give up. Thank you for listening to English SpeakCast. We hope J.K. Rowling's journey inspires you, not just to dream, but to act. And don't forget to join us for the next story in our Learn English Through Story series, because every story has lessons, magic, and hope waiting for you. Keep listening, keep learning, keep believing. The quiet moments of today may be the magic of tomorrow. English SpeakCast.